This discussion is being recorded by the Atlanta Forum Network and will be available online at www.atlantaforumnetwork.org. The objectives of the Theosophical Society are, 1, to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, or ethnicity. 2, to encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, science, and the arts. To investigate the unexplained laws of nature and powers latent in man. Let's take a moment and listen to this benediction. It's by Annie Besant. O hidden light, vibrant in every atom. O hidden light, shining in every creature. O hidden love, embracing all in oneness. May each who feels himself as one with thee know he is therefore one with every other. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Rocco Errico. Dr. Errico will be speaking on the Scriptures through Near East eyes. Dr. Errico is a minister, author of 5 books, lecturer, and a leading biblical scholar working from the original Aramaic text. In this lecture, Dr. Errico builds a bridge between our Western understanding and the Near Eastern social realities and helps us see the Scriptures through Semitic Aramaic eyes. In its original language that the Hebrew patriarchs, prophets, Jesus, his disciples, and contemporaries spoke, taught, and wrote. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Errico.
Good afternoon. It is my usual custom when I open up to open with the Lord's Prayer in the ancient Aramaic tongue. So I'm going to do that right now. In other words, this is the way it fell from his lips almost 2,000 years ago. Shall we pray? Awun washmeya nitkadeshishmach te malkuthach nechwe seviana ke kana dashmeya apar haulan lach masunkanen yaumana washwalk lan hau bain a kanadap hanan shwaken la hayawain la talanisiona ella pasen membisha methol dilachi malkutha heilig dich bochta la alam almin. Amen. There's only one major difference when I say this prayer in Aramaic and we bring it into English, and that's with this word, al, and it looks like this in Aramaic. This is an A, and this is an L, and we say al, and it has many, many meanings, lots of meanings. In fact, they only have Aramaic to English. There's no English to Aramaic. It's Aramaic to English dictionary, and this serves as a preposition as well as a verb. Just these 2 letters, A and L. And it means to enter into, not lead. And with all the meanings, not once does it ever mean lead. It means to enter into, it means to fight, to wrestle. It has all these meanings as a verb, but as a preposition, it means on, upon, over, above, has all those other meanings. And when we say it in the prayer, this is what it looks like. Ta'lan. Ta'lan, which means, and do not let us enter into temptation. In other words, the way Benjamin Franklin translated, that is, he was guessing at it because he never liked the Lord's Prayer the way it was written. So what he did was, when he came to this part, lead us not into temptation, he changed it to, and keep us out of trouble, which it was typical of Benjamin Franklin, you see. And but this is the actual Aramaic word, and this is the root of it, A-L, right here, which means to enter into. And this is the letter N, And this is a T, the final T. This is when it becomes a verb, meaning to wrestle, to enter into something, or not. The reason why we say not to enter is because the word that follows it, that comes before it. And that's la. La means no, enter. Do not let us enter into temptation. Well, I always say that at the beginning. Before I actually start the program, bridging the gap between the East and the West, I want to tell you a little bit how it started. And this is a wonderful little book I have. It was published, and it's literally falling apart on me. I don't know what I'm going to do when it does, because this is an 1814 edition. See what I mean? And I have to be careful with the pages. This is an 1814 edition. It's called The Nestorians, which is really a wrong name, or The Lost Tribes. The Lost Tribes of Israel. They were never lost. They were scattered. And they were scattered in northern Iraq, in what we call today Afghanistan, and today is also known as Pakistan. They were scattered all in that area. And I didn't want to lose my place. Yeah, here we go. This was published in 1814, but it was written before that. This is a diary published by Harper, today known as HarperCollins. Then before that it was Harper Row, but it was done by the company here in the United States in 1814, where they discovered the ancient descendants of the ancient Assyrians. And he was traveling to find these Christians who lived in the mountains of Kurdistan, and which was owned by Turkey at that time. And this was a medical doctor and a missionary. He was Presbyterian, and the Presbyterian Church sent them there in the early 1800s to find these Christians, these Aramaic-speaking Christians. And so he says a little, I'm just going to read a little bit of it, and he records a conversation. And the reason why I like to read this, because it gives you a feel and an idea of what the people were like. Now, this is about the Kurds. We call them Kurds, but it's really pronounced Kurds. And he says, the Kurds, to whom frequent allusions will be made in this diary, are a warlike race of people inhabiting the mountainous country between Persia and Turkey. But their more powerful tribes have seldom acknowledged more than a nominal allegiance to either of these governments. And some of them have maintained entire independence. A part of them are nomads living in tents, and a part of them stationary tenants of villages. But all of them, more or less, given to predatory habits. The following dialogue, which I held with one of the nomadic Kurds and with a Nestorian bishop, may serve to illustrate the character of this bloody people. Similar statements have frequently been made by other Kurds, confirmed by Nestorians and Persians, which are Iranians. I'm going to say M myself, meaning the doctor speaking. So he says to the Kurd, "Where do you live?" K is Kurd. K responds, "In black tents. We are Kuchi Kurds." M, "What is your occupation?" B is bishop. He's interfering with the conversation. "You need not ask him. I will tell you what his occupation is. They are all thieves." M, "Is that true, Kurd?" "Yes, it is true. We steal whenever we can. Do you kill people too? Well, when we meet a man that we wish to rob, if we prove the strongest, we kill him. If he proves stronger, he kills us. But suppose he offers no resistance when you attempt to rob him. If he have much property, we would kill him to prevent his making us trouble. If he had not much, we would let him go. Yes, after you have whipped him well, says the bishop. Suppose you meet a poor man who had nothing but his clothes. What would you do? Would you molest him? If his clothes were good, we would take them and give him poor ones in exchange. If not, we would let him pass. But this is a bad business in which you are engaged, of robbing people. Why do you not follow some other occupation? What shall we do? We have no plows or fields, and robbing is our trade. The Persians will give you land if you will cultivate it. We do not know how to work the land. It is very easy to learn. Will you make the trial? Bishop, he does not wish to work. He had rather steal. The court answers, he speaks the truth. It would be very difficult and take a long time to get what we want by working for it. But by robbing a village, we can get a great deal of property in a single night. This would solve the job problem, wouldn't it? But you are liable to be killed in these affrays. Well, suppose we are killed. We must die sometime, and what is the difference of dying now or a few days from now? When we rob a village, we go in large parties upon horses, surprise the villagers when they are asleep, and escape with their property before they are ready to defend themselves. If we are pursued, we strike our tents and flee to our strongholds in the mountains. Why do you not come and rob these villages as you used to do? The bishop answers, they could not live if driven out of Persia. They fear the Persians. We should have no other place to winter our flocks, so we give the Persians some presents and keep at peace with them. I wish to visit your tribe. How would they treat me? Oh, upon my eyes, they would do everything for you. Means he's speaking the truth. Upon my eyes means may they be taken from me if I'm not telling you the truth. But you say that they are thieves and murderers. Perhaps they would rob and kill me. No, no, no. They wish to have you come, but you are not willing. We never rob our friends. You come to do good. You are a doctor, and no one would hurt you. But many of them do not know me. They all know you, and they've heard of you, and would treat you with the greatest kindness if you should visit them. He had to pass through the Kurds in order to get to the Assyrian Christians. And because the whole book is really about his meeting with the Assyrian Christians, where he found Near Eastern Aramaic manuscripts of the New Testament. And then, of course, later on of the whole Bible. And this is what I'm representing, the scriptures through the eyes of the Near East. Most of us read Scripture or understand Scripture or were brought up in Scripture in Sunday school or some church or something somewhere, and were influenced by Western theology, Sunday school teaching, and denominational doctrines, dogmas, and theologies. No one approaches it from the point of view of the Near East. Everyone comes at it with their own doctrinal beliefs to find scriptures that can back up their belief system. And that's not how the Bible was written. And Jesus himself had no theology, as we call it theology today. This was all done by the West and by the Greek and Latin influences in our teachings, and not by the Near Eastern approach. So that much is what makes the difference. What I did, which I'm going to give you just a little brief picture of, is I put together 7 keys that help open up Scriptures. And they're all from a Near Eastern point of view. I used to just lecture on it and didn't think about writing a book. Finally, people were after me, please put it in a book form. So I did. And the 7 keys are these. Number 1, to really understand the Scriptures, you'll have to bypass Greek translations of the Bible and go through to the Aramaic. And even when you use Hebrew, and you compare the Hebrew with the Aramaic text, because when they went from Hebrew to Aramaic, they had older texts, so the Aramaic is more accurate for the Old Testament as well. So when Dr. Lamza, who was my mentor, and we worked together 10 years, when he finished the Bible in 1957, the complete translation, he discovered there were about 12,000 differences. So I made the first key the Aramaic language. The Aramaic language is the route into understanding the Scriptures through the eyes of the Near East. As much as possible, avoiding theology and all the other understanding. And then once you get that clear understanding of Scripture, then when you interpret it metaphysically, you will find that you have a clearer meaning behind it. In fact, a lot of things written in the Scripture were written metaphysically. But people don't realize that. And they take everything literally, which gets us in trouble. Okay, so the first key is the Aramaic language. And let me give you the keys real quickly, then I'll go into a few of them to make comparisons so you can see the difference. For instance, what I just did here on the board, giving you this Aramaic word, this is one of the major differences of the 12,000, which isn't bad considering that we have 66 books. So 12,000 mistranslations is not bad. But one that is very misunderstood, where it says God is a jealous God, the Aramaic doesn't say that. Aramaic says zealous, not jealous. In fact, the last 20 years, with the new Jewish translations coming out from Hebrew on the Old Testament, not among Christians or Christian Bible translations, but among the Hebrew people, Jewish people, they no longer use the term jealous anymore either in their translation. But the Aramaic is zealous, not jealous. That's only 2 differences I've done. But let me go on to the other keys before we go into some of it. The second key are the idioms in the Bible, which were literally, beautifully, wonderfully translated, but the meaning lost completely. And you know what an idiom is. An idiom is a peculiar expression of speech that we have even in English, where we say one thing, but we mean something else, right? For instance, if I said, oh, I'm hot under the collar, what do you suppose that means? Can you imagine bringing that into another language? Hot under the collar, well, we don't know. Or how about someone's been living in hot water for 6 months? Red tape is even worse. Right? Imagine being in hot water for 6 months. Dr. Lamza, when he first came to this country, now he knew his top language was English. He spoke 8 languages. Aramaic was his native tongue. He was born with that tongue in the culture he was brought up in the mountains. He comes from these mountains that Dr. Ashel Grant wrote his little diary about and his experiences. And he said when he came here, he didn't understand what we were talking about, how people could live in hot water for 6 months. But worst of all is when people would invite him to their homes and they would say, please drop in. And he was always afraid to go. Because, he didn't understand what drop in meant. How do you drop in somewhere? He thought maybe you had to climb down a ladder. I mean, he had all these funny thoughts. He took many things very literally. And we did the same thing with the Bible, translated so many things literally. What were some of those things? Well, I'll get to them in a minute. The third key is mysticism in the Scriptures. Over 40% of Scripture, is based on mystical experience. That is, visions, dreams, voices, inner workings, all the inner workings. It's all there. No one ever teaches it from that point of view. But it's there. And what I'm talking about the general Christian era doesn't teach it. Okay, then you have the fourth key, which is the culture. You don't understand even Jesus and how he approached things without understanding him from his own cultural background. And the words he used. He's the one who originated the word hellfire, you know. At least it's recorded that way in the gospel. But what did he mean when he used the term hellfire? Did he mean a place where God roasts people? Not at all. Then, one time I was invited when I was lecturing in Kansas City, Missouri, at it was really Lee's Summit at Unity Village, and they had me on the on the television, on the news, prime time, and I was interviewed for about 6 minutes, and the first question they asked me was about hellfire. And I said, no, God doesn't roast people. And then he had a wonderful sense of humor. He said, oh, you mean God doesn't barbecue? I said, no, God doesn't barbecue. We barbecue, and we love to barbecue people too. And I said, no, these were all Aramaic idiomatic terms of speech, and that's what makes the difference here. Well, I'll get to the meaning of that in a minute. So we have 4 keys so far. And the 5th key is the psychology of the people. You have to understand their psychology. The 6th key is the symbolism in the Bible. Loads of symbols. And the last key is amplification. And I use the word amplification because we misunderstand it. If I use the word we normally would use, we would say exaggeration. And people are a little offended if I say there are exaggerations in the Scripture. But there are. We call it amplification because a Near Eastern speaker will amplify what he's telling you. If he only met one person, he'll tell you he met 20 or 30. And why he does that is to make an impression on you. In other words, to make sure you don't forget what he's telling you. That's why you have many things in the Scriptures that are amplified. Like Samson killed 1,000 soldiers with the jawbone of an ass. Would you settle for 50? This is how the Eastern people, and the Eastern writers would do this. They weren't Greek writers, they were Near Eastern writers. And the Gospels also were written by Near Easterners. Luke was not a Greek. He had a Greek name, Lucas, but he was not a Greek. He was Semitic. Now, he could have been Jewish or Semitic. We don't know which of the Semitic races he came from, but he was not a Greek. Neither was Matthew, neither was Mark, neither was John. They were all Semites who gave us what we call the 4 Gospels. So there basically are the 7 keys that help unlock the Scriptures. Now, I'm going to go into some of it so you can see the differences, so we can bridge. This is the bridge we're going to cross. The bridge is the Aramaic, the bridges are the idioms, all of that, and we can cross right into the Near East, where everything that was difficult, contradictory, confusing, becomes clear, open, and understood. So, As I said, there are about 12,000 differences. I'm just going to give you a few. I already gave you one, and I think another one, which is so terribly misunderstood, I'll just put part of it up here, where Jesus says, it's been recorded, we call it Good Friday. In the Near East, they call it Suffering Friday, where Jesus was brought to the cross, and he says on the cross, in Aramaic, and it's written in all Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, in Aramaic. That's why it says, which is being interpreted, meaning we're not sure of this interpretation. El, ilmana, schwachten. Maybe you're used to hearing it, Eli, Eli, Shabachthani, and it's not. It's ilmana. And this is the word here, was where they made the mistake. This is the word shwak. And it has many, many meanings in Aramaic. This is S-H-B, but the B becomes soft, and they make a W sound out of it. And this is a Q-N-N. Oops. Oh, I made a mistake. Where's the eraser? You wouldn't have known. There. Shabachthani. I forgot to put me in here. This is the word for me, this little thing right here. This is the word shwak. It means to leave something for a purpose, not to abandon. And yet we translate it, my God, why have you forsaken me? The word, that's how we normally translate it in all our Bibles. Jesus said on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? But the word to forsake is ta'atani and nashatani. You hear the difference? This is shwak. So what he says is, oh God, for this was I left, or this is my purpose in life. In other words, it is similar to what the Arab people say today, it is written. He did not feel forsaken by God. In fact, he told his disciples, you will leave me, but my Father is with me always. And there are even ancient commentaries, which I have in my book, Let There Be Light, which are the 7 keys. I have in there the ancient commentary where no one understood it as, why have you forsaken me? So this is another difference. And there's another one in the Psalm 7:11. God is a just judge. He is angry every day. Aramaic says God is a just judge. No, it's the old one says God judges the righteous. But the Aramaic says God is a just judge. He is not angry every day. Big difference, isn't there? So, again, I've just given you a few because I don't have time to go into detail in all these. Because if I just spent time on the first key, we'd be here for at least 3 or 4 hours, showing you the differences. But that's enough right there. Just the 3 or 4 that I've given you to show the difference. There are 12,000 differences. Let's go to idioms. Idioms in the Bible where we say one thing, but we mean something else. Like I said in English, to be in hot water. In fact, as I said, Dr. Lambda took a lot of things literally, until he got used to our expressions. That's okay, I'll use this. I don't mind holding this. So, what are some of the idioms in the Bible? Let's start in Genesis. To be put out of the Garden of Eden is an idiom which means to lose a consciousness of abundant living. When you put out of the garden, in other words, you put yourself out of the state of joy and happiness. There was no, when we get to the symbolism and parables and stuff, you'll see that there was no real Garden of Eden. That is, the Garden of Eden, the Eden existed, but the story is a story. And people take it literally. The trees mean something. Those are all the symbols involved. And really a metaphor, the trees. But the idiom involved, to be put out of the garden, means to lose a consciousness of abundant living. And we'll move on. Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt. This means she suffered a stroke and became paralyzed and died. But in the Near East, they had no word for stroke. They had no word for paralyze. They had, I'm talking about in the ancient world, so they say she turned to a pillar of salt. They also used the expression to turn to stone. They used both. And in another place it says that the man's heart turned to stone, but he lived 10 days. I like to see someone's heart turn to stone and then live for 10 days. This is all idiomatic expressions. Then the prophets used a lot of idioms too, where the prophets state, the lion will dwell with the lamb, and the lion will eat straw like an ox. That means strong nations will learn to be content with their own wealth and not try to devour the wealth of others. Big difference, isn't it? Then let's move on to the New Testament, where Jesus uses the term hellfire. What does hellfire mean when Jesus used it? What he was saying is, don't say or do things that you will regret, that you cannot take back, and you burn for it. Especially in the Near East, there's all kinds of things you can say that you could bring your life in danger. So it was not a place, it was a state of being where if you do or say things, you put yourself in jeopardy. You put yourself in torment. It means torment and regret. Things you wished you hadn't have done, but it's done, and you can't take it back. And you suffer for it. And again, that's an idiomatic expression. He said, if someone strikes you on one side of the cheek, turn and give him the other. Which means, in plain English, nip it in the bud. Take care of the problem while it's small. Don't, more literally, don't augment a problem. That's what that means when he used it. He used all these Aramaic expressions of speech that people take literally. And so we missed it. And we go to the New Testament, the Apostle Paul. He uses a lot of idioms too. He says he had a thorn in the flesh. A thorn in the flesh means he had a grievance. And the grievance was people were not acknowledging him as an apostle. And they constantly were tormenting him and saying, don't listen to him. And that was like a thorn in his flesh. Wherever he would go, these troublemakers would be there before him, talking against him. But there was no thorn in his flesh. He had no sickness. He was a strong man. He was in shipwrecks. He had been beaten, all kinds of things. And yet they say that he had some sort of weakness. He had no weakness at all. This is how they talk in the Near East. When you have a grievance, something is bothering you, you have a thorn in the flesh. You know how a thorn can stay in your flesh and what happens? That's what they do. But another one, which is very difficult to understand, is where he says to the Corinthians, oh, you Corinthians, my mouth is wide open. My heart is enlarged. Now be straightened in your bowels. Wouldn't you like to know a commentary on that one? To have an open mouth It means I've told you everything. An enlarged heart. Literally, the Aramaic says, King James says enlarged heart, but the Aramaic uses the word, my heart breathes freely. In other words, everything is working well with my heart, pumping, breathing freely, which means I am free of any responsibility. I've told you everything, now it's up to you. That's why he says, now be moved, be ye straightened in your bowels. Would you like to know what that means? Which means now since I've told you everything, and I am relieved of any responsibility, now show affection toward me. Because the bowels in this whole area here was the place of affection, love. This is how they say it. That's why in another place he says, I greet you through the bowels of our Lord Jesus Christ. Which means I greet you through the affections of our Lord Jesus Christ. And there's another one that's really, really bad. I tell this one every once in a while. This is in the Old Testament. It's in the love story called the Song of Solomon, where it's written, and my beloved put his hand to the door to open it. And she says, and my bowels moved. Can you imagine that, taking a dump when you're when your lover's at the door? It should have been translated, my beloved put his hand to the door, and my passions stirred. Yes, that's how it should be. But you see, literally it does say that. The bowels moved. And that's why they kept it that way. Because they didn't know the meaning of it in Semitic languages. And it's the same, still the same today in Arabic, in the Near East when they use the Hebrew, and in the Aramaic, still used today. The meaning, using the vowels. And for knowledge, they referred to, for instance, if you got something ahead of time, they would say, oh, I received the news, my kidneys told me. They located everything in different areas of the body. And that's why they use this expression. So this is what Paul is saying. It's used, and then in the Song of Solomon, when the term bowels are used. It can mean mercy. It can mean tenderness. It has lots of meanings. Lots of meanings. And so this is how they use it in the Near East. I think that's enough idioms. I'll have to go on to the other, because I do want to open it up for questions you may have too. The third key is mysticism in the Bible. All the appearances of God are in visions and dreams. They were from an inward condition or an altered state of consciousness, or an expanded state of consciousness. No one would literally see God. And all the appearances of God on Mount Sinai, and thunder and storm and lightning, all that was poetic speech to signify the presence of God was on the mountain with Moses. This is poetic style of writing, when they talk about lightning and thunder and all of this. So the mysticism has to do with our inward understanding. Has to do with the inner mind, the inner heart, the inner eyes, and the inner ears. Because that's what hears the spiritual messages. And so every time an angel appears to Samson's mother, or to either she's dreaming, or she's seeing a vision, she's in an altered state of consciousness, or it's just daydreaming. When you daydream, you go into an altered state of consciousness because you're no longer here, you're elsewhere. You're seeing things differently. So every time you read, the angel of the Lord appeared to the prophets, where it says, and the word of the Lord came to Isaiah. The term, and the word of the Lord, is a Aramaic phrase that means to come by revelation or dream. Revelation means to come by vision. The book of Revelation means a book of visions. Giliana is the Aramaic word, and it means to see by the mind and not by the physical eyes. This is the meaning of that. So you have over 40% of the Bible is based on that. Again, people take it literally. So we'll have to move on from there. And we come to what I'm going to do, because time is pressing in on me. What I'm going to do is combine some of the psychology and the culture together. When Jesus talked about turning the other cheek, when people borrow and want to take something from you, give them something more, all this is the psychology and the culture of the people. When they see you are a meek person, they generally leave you alone. When the Kurds, who belonged to the faith of Islam at that time, I'm talking about during Dr. Lamb's time, when he was in the same mountain, and these Christians were Aramaic-speaking Christians, like a little island in a sea of Muslims, in a sea of it. And they were and that's why they preserved the Aramaic language, the ancient Eastern customs. And this is why Dr. Grant said, if Abraham were to come alive and live among these people, he'd feel perfectly at home. Abraham? You're talking about a man almost 4,000 years old. He would feel at home because they kept the ancient customs, where even when the animals were sacrificed and blood put on the forehead, all of this was still done. And the way they did the sacrifices, it was still done in this area. And when he came in this area, he discovered that in fact, another scholar, besides this medical doctor, another British scholar wrote a book, which I also have. He was one of the missionaries sent by England into that area, and he said nowhere in all the Near East are the ancient customs kept as they are here in the mountains of Kurdistan. Now, he made that statement. Nowhere else. And there were many places all over the Near East where they kept customs, some similar ancient customs, but none like in the area that Dr. Lamsa came from. So you're getting closer and closer to this ancient way of viewing the Scripture. And so, from that, we can understand many things that Jesus said and did in the psychology of the people. When Lamsa was passing through, he was by himself. These two Muslims came on horses, and they saw him, and because they know right away by the way he was dressed that he was a Christian. And they wanted to slay him. He didn't resist them. He said he just bent his neck, and he was a young man at that time. He bent his neck to have them kill him. And the other one stopped him and said, "No, he's a meek man, let him go." This is why Jesus advocated meekness to solve problems. As long as you're hot-headed, you'll never solve problems. This is why he advocated it. And nations need to learn this. Governments need to learn this. Politicians need to learn this. That's the only way we'll have peace. The only way we'll have peace. Sword only temporarily brings peace. And I always tell people, how you obtain something is how you maintain it. If you obtain it by force, You have to hold it by force. And that goes for relationships, how you treat yourself, how you treat others, all the time. And when people steal, they know they have property that doesn't belong to them. And you have to hide, and you do damage psychologically to yourself. So Jesus, he had the religion we hear of Jesus today is not his religion at all. Not at all. What we hear are ideas about Jesus and not what Jesus himself taught. We don't hear that. We hear more Paul. We hear more of the book of the Revelation. We don't really hear Jesus teaching what he taught. And his gospel is different from the gospel we've been hearing for the last 250 years. He never taught the cross. Because the cross, now I'm not saying the cross doesn't have meaning. It has meaning, but not the meaning we've given it. We've given it an entirely different meaning. So again, you have to understand the background of the people, the culture of the people, and why we even interpreted the cross differently, why the early followers of Jesus interpreted the cross differently. And Jesus never interpreted the cross. That was not his gospel. His gospel had to do with the activity of God in our lives today. That's the difference. So, now, always now, always now. So there are many things that he said in what we call the Sermon on the Mount, which was no sermon on any mount. But that's what we call it. They are a collection of his teachings that he gave in different areas. Because Luke says that Jesus gave this, if you want to call Sermon on the Mount, he was in the plains. And if you're reading the Gospel of Luke, it's called Sermon on the Plains. So where was it, the mount or the plains? No. It's the writer that's giving it that shade of meaning. It makes no difference whether he said it at a synagogue, outside the synagogue, in the countryside, in the plains, or on a slope. We'll never know that. It's the writers that color it and frame it. They frame his teachings in a particular setting. And so you have to realize that. This is how the Eastern style, this is their psychology, this is how they represent their culture. And you have to understand that. And many things Jesus seemed to say that were hard and harsh, but you have to understand it from that cultural point of view, which he was not. He was not a judgmental type of teacher. Okay, let's go now to the sixth key, symbolism. And under symbolism, I put parables, metaphors. And that's why we go to the Garden of Eden. The tree of life represents man's progeny, the continuance. And the tree of knowledge of good and evil means a comprehensive knowledge. What throws us off is the term good and evil. Because they didn't have words like we have, pros and cons. I could easily translate this tree as the tree of the knowledge of the pros and cons. Because there's always two sides to everything, right? When you buy a house, you always think, oh, I've got a perfect house. And when you get in it, oh, I would have changed this, I would change that. What are you doing? You know, you got the pros and cons of everything, right? There's always two sides to everything, but we call it evil, meaning something sinister. And it doesn't mean that at all. Now, as to the real meaning of why the tree was forbidden, that's a separate lecture. So I can't get into that. But all of that, I've written books on it. I have 15 books. I've been doing the commentaries. I've completed the New Testament, and I'm 2/3 of the way through the Old Testament. And I've got an Aramaic light on the book of Genesis, which explains the Adam and Eve story. It's called Aramaic Light on Genesis. And I go into detail on that. And the serpent, can you imagine a talking serpent? This is a symbol. In fact, what we call Aesop's fables, they're all taken from the Near Eastern world, that is, the Arab world and the Assyrian and Chaldeans. The Semitic people gave us those fables. The Greeks took them and renamed them, and the Greeks got credit for it. They all come from the Near East. And remember, Aesop has talking animals, all kinds of stuff. And they did in the Near East too. That's why the serpent is talking. No serpent talks. And God didn't make him crawl on the ground. He always crawled on the ground. Again, this is the Near Eastern way of writing. The serpent represents our own self-deception, how we deceive ourselves. This is the trees, the serpent, all that is metaphorical speech under symbolism. Then we go throughout the Bible. The prophets, you don't understand the prophets without breaking down all the symbols. But what's interesting, there is one that wasn't a symbol but an Aramaic idiom, where Jonah was swallowed by a fish. The New Testament, our New Testament translation says whale, but not in the Aramaic and in the Hebrew, not even in the Hebrew. It says a fish. You got to change?
No, we're giving a lot more time.
Okay. It says a fish, not a whale. In other words, literally, if you're reading Hebrew and the Aramaic, it says God made an appointment with the fish to swallow Jonah. To be in a fish is the same thing as when we get in a pickle. You know people who've been living in a pickle, right? Or how about a jam? It means you're in trouble. So to be swallowed by a fish means Jonah was in trouble because he didn't want to prophesy to Assyria, among the Assyrians. And by the way, the capital of Assyria was Nineveh. That's Aramaic, meaning fish. See, he didn't want to follow through with the mission. See, so in his dream, he flees from God. And it's written with a lot of humor, too. And I never brought out the humor in the Scriptures, because that goes under the fourth key of the culture and also psychology. Jesus had humor. The biblical writers had humor. But because it's Aramaic, we don't get it. And when you translate it into English, it's lost. I mean, we read it too literally. We don't realize it's a humor statement. I'll give you an example of it, where Jesus said, you want to take care of the little teeny little beany little twig in your brother's eye, and you got this beam sticking out in yours? Here I am. You say, oh, I got a twig in my eye, a little straw. Oh, let me take care of it. I got this big beam sticking out of mine. I can handle it for you. That's Jesus' humor. And even in his parables are loaded with humor. But you have to understand that. That comes under this sixth key of symbolism, with the parables and the background and Jonah. All this is symbolic speech. And again, a little child will lead them, will lead the nations. And the child will put his hand in the den of an asp and not get stung. Which means meek, simple, now not simpletons, but meek, simple people will negotiate for the nations. Putting your hand in the den of asps means with the enemy, the nation's enemies. But because you are guided by God, guided by meekness, guided by another way of life, you can negotiate and bring peace. That's why it says a little child shall lead them. But it takes a lot of training for that. And a lot of washing away of wanting revenge and my way, etc., etc. And so this is how the prophets talked. They used this language. And the book of the Revelation is nothing but symbolisms all the way through. As people want to argue with me with Jesus coming on the clouds. I said, but the book of Revelation says he's coming on a horse, so which is it, cloud or horse? And they said, no, the horse is on the cloud. They argue with me about that, you know. I said, but the whole thing is a symbol, an idiomatic. To ride a cloud in Aramaic means to succeed in your mission. Means to be above everything, to succeed. You're coming in on the clouds. If you ever saw the old-fashioned film, The Thief of Baghdad with Sabu, when he was conquering, he comes in on the sky. Anything that you're lifted from the sky means you're successful. Oh, we even say that today. We say, oh, he's on cloud 9 or she's on cloud 9, don't we? Meaning very successful. No. It's not literal. Everyone is literally waiting, and they're going to wait and wait and wait. Thousands, if we're still here. Thousands and thousands of years, see. All this taken too literally, not understanding the background. And now it's almost time for me to stop. Will we have time for questions? Let me give you the last key that helps bridge the East and the West. The last key is amplification. As I said, we use the term exaggerate. But in the Near East, you must amplify. If you don't amplify, no one will listen to you. You're boring. You'd be a boring speaker if you didn't amplify. See? It's like our newspapers. Everyone amplifies. You do it on the phone when you're talking to your friend. You'll say, oh, you just don't know how many people told me. Maybe only one told you. You will look so innocent out there, doesn't it? In the Near East, they use amplification for emphasis. For emphasis. The best illustration I can use is like a painting on canvas. A painting may be beautiful, but when you put a border around the painting, what happens? It stands out. It stands out. So it is in the Scriptures. This is why one place it says Jesus fed 5,000, and another place it says 4,000. Look, they weren't there with Texas Instruments calculating, oh, you're 1, you're 2, you're 3, you're 4. Most of them wouldn't even know how to count past 100. So this is done by the writers. They amplify. And as I told you, Samson killed 1,000 soldiers with the jawbone of an ass. No, maybe 50, maybe 60. He was a strong man, most definitely. So there, I only gave you just a few examples of the 7 keys that create a bridge upon which we can cross and enter into the Near East and see the Bible in a new, wonderful, fresh way. Thank you.
I have a question. It really bothers me that they're supposed to sacrifice all these animals just for no reason at all. Is that really the intent, or has it been skewed through?
No, there was a reason for it. Most in the ancient world, this is interesting, the more intelligent the people were, in the ancient world I'm talking about now.
It's not working.
It's still not working?
We're handing that mic around.
All right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The question was about animal sacrifices. In the ancient world, the more intelligent the people were, the more they did human sacrifices. And the reason why Moses instituted animal sacrifices was so the people wouldn't be tempted to sacrifice their children.
They were intelligent?
Isn't that? But this is the ancient world. You take something innocent to cleanse the guilty. This is how they interpreted the blood of Jesus on the cross. Isn't that what you hear today? He died for your sins? No, the Aramaic doesn't say he died for our sins. It says he died because of. So did Martin Luther King. He died because of our sins. And so did Gandhi. It's all political reasons behind it, see. And it's the same thing when Jesus died on the cross, see. But the ancient world believed you take something innocent to cleanse the guilty. Now, I know I've said a lot in that, but there needs a lot to be explained. But this is an interesting, the whole idea of sacrifice. Why sacrifice? Yeah. Because it goes way, way, way back, primitively, as far as back as man can think. The gods must be angry over something, so you have to take a life to stop the anger of the gods. But when Moses instituted it, and that's what he did, Abraham did it, most people don't realize it. You know what sacrifice was? I'm talking about Abraham now, before it was institutionalized by Moses, where it became something that you would do ritually. Abraham, they did this all over the Near East. What they did is they built up an altar. The word altar means a barbecue pit. We have more altars in the back homes of America than they do all over the Near East. And they would take the animal, roast it. When Abraham worshiped God, he would invite all the people that would come, because he would get the animals, roast it, and share it with the people. They ate. And the poor would come, people who didn't have anything, and they came and they ate, because the worship, part of the worship was to feed the people. That's how Jesus survived when he was in the temple, because they shared. The priests, of course, got the best meat. Once it became institutionalized, it was different. The priests got the best meat, but the worshipers also got some food, and they ate. And Jesus was able to eat there, you see. And this is when it was started. But it was instituted by Moses so they wouldn't remember, Abraham was tempted to sacrifice Isaac. And it's called the Akedah in Hebrew, where he wanted to sacrifice his son. But he's dreaming. He never took his son to Mount Moriah and never put him on an altar to kill him. This is a dream. The dream taught him, I do not want human sacrifice. Don't ever, ever think I want human sacrifice. His inner spiritual nature won out over the culture of the times. Do you realize that? Most people don't realize it when they're reading that about Abraham. They think, oh, God came down and gave a definite dispensational time and open. No, 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 no. The spiritual forces in Abraham is what we call the God of Abraham. That's why he's called the God of Abraham, because they were his own spiritual innate forces. And so when he received this of not sacrificing his son, he knew God never wanted human sacrifice. And he knew God never even wanted animal sacrifices, but he shared the animal with the people. Just like we cook meat and stuff today, you put it in the oven. We just don't do it outside because they didn't have the ovens we have today, right? So that's what they did in the ancient world. But originally, it comes from the gods wanting to be appeased for their wrath against something wrong. But you see, the story of the Bible is the story of humankind transcending consciousness. In other words, the opening of themselves spiritually, and it's transcending each time until it climaxes in Jesus. He had the most infinite, wonderful understanding of God more than the other people. So it's transcending consciousness until we get to Jesus. And then it's fully explored and exploded and in Jesus and his teachings. Yes. Well, let me finish on this side, then I'll come over here, okay? Let's see. Yes, right here.
What, in terms of the psychology of the time, what do you think of the idea that Jesus might have been married to?
Oh, I was waiting for that question.
Of course.
He could have been, but we have no historical, real evidence that he was. And generally, people who dedicated their lives to a certain mission wouldn't marry. Not because God told them that they couldn't, but it was Dr. Lamsa, when he started translating the Bible, I mean, he knew DuPont, he knew the Kellogg's. In fact, the Kellogg's helped him a lot. You know, the cereal, Kellogg, up in Michigan there. He knew the Kellogg's. He knew all of these people. And, of course, there were a lot of single women, and they wanted to marry Lamsa, but when they found out he was going to work and translate the Bible, they didn't want to, because they know he gave his life in translating the Bible and doing the works he did. And in fact, when I met him, because I was married and had children and everything, and he used to eat with me, because we worked together 10 years, intensively for 3 years. And so, same thing with Jesus. He had a certain mission, and that's probably, he could have been married. I'm not denying that he might have even had a wife, but there's no recording of it, because women don't get mentioned unless they do something really outstanding. They don't get mentioned, and you know how the Near Eastern people are when it comes to women. You know, the Arab world still shows a lot of that today. This is part of the conflict. We're having a cultural conflict over it, too. Because they make the culture the religious notion, and it's not. They don't separate between culture and religion. You know, we say secular. They think secular is awful. It should be all religious. So all the cultural norms are there. No, he could have been married, but we have no historical evidence on that. And don't fall for any book that you read and tells you so. Yes.
I want to know the Joseph of the Old Testament. The Joseph of the Old Testament with Father Jacob, and the Joseph New Testament with Mary. They're the same or different?
No, they're two different Josephs.
But both of them had their father was Joseph in the New Testament, the Old Testament. Their father was Jacob. The same token.
I don't get your question.
On the Old Testament, Joseph. Father was Jacob, and the one was sold into Egypt, and also the Joseph in the New Testament, father of Jesus in the New Testament.
Yes.
Are they the same or different?
No, they're different.
Different.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Absolutely different.
Oh, can you tell me the difference between Arabic and Aramaic?
Between what language?
Aramaic and Arabic.
Oh, Arabic, yes. Aramaic was the most ancient language in the Near East. Arabic and Hebrew come from, the roots are Aramaic. They're all Semitic. The three Semitic languages we know, Aramaic, Hebrew, and Arabic. The roots of Hebrew and Arabic come from Aramaic. Mm-hmm. Over here now.
There's a passage, I think that Jesus spoke, and he said, I do not come in peace,
But I come to bring a
bearing
sword.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you explain that?
Yes, which means that his teachings would cause division in the family, because some would want to stick to tradition and some would want to go the way Jesus was teaching. So that's what he means by it. So it means a division. It means my teachings will bring some problems, just as they do today. Because why? People get stuck in the traditional way of everything. Same thing today. This is why people in some churches call me the Antichrist.
Oh, so you are the one.
Because I don't follow traditional teachings and approach to Scripture. When Dr. Lamsa was alive, he was called the Antichrist, and I was the assistant to the Antichrist. Yes. Did you have a question?
My question was, you spoke earlier on the fact that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were, and you spoke as if Luke had actually written it. What's your take on the fact that some of the early Gnostic followers had patriarchal, they were patriarchal followers of like each apostle? that those house churches actually wrote those books?
No. Luke did write it. And he gathered it from hearsay from other people. And he used also Matthew. He basically followed Matthew. This is the opposite of what you learn in seminaries. They teach you Mark is the original gospel. But Matthew's the original gospel. Mark copies Matthew, and Luke copies Matthew, but Luke adds material that he got from other people. And Mark condenses what Matthew had to say. And they've done a lot of research on it. I also have all the books on that to prove that Luke copied Matthew and that Mark also copied Matthew. Matthew's the original. But then scribes later on added more material into Matthew that the original Gospel of Matthew did not have. There was no birth story of Jesus in the original Matthew. This was added later, much later. And so was the genealogy in Matthew. This was all added later. And that's why Mark doesn't have any genealogy or the birth of Jesus. Luke has a completely different story. Jesus doesn't go to Egypt when he's a baby. And Mary and Joseph don't flee to Egypt. They stay right there. And what if I were to tell you that Jesus wasn't born in Bethlehem?
Well, the people that run the tourist sites wouldn't like that.
No. That's why you can see why I'm considered an antichrist. And how about every Christmas when we start singing? We're going to be singing it pretty soon, right? We're already in October. We're going to sing, "Oh, Bethlehem," you know. There might have been a Bethlehem. Some scholars suggest that there might have been a Bethlehem in Galilee. But when the writers when they added this extra material, they made it the city of David, Bethlehem, which is in the south, rather than the Bethlehem which was in the north. And Bethlehem means the house of bread. That's what Bethlehem means. Beth is house. Lechem is bread. That's Hebrew. Lachma is Aramaic.
I'd like to ask you about the Last Supper, the bread and the wine. I have read an account that they actually ate part of Jesus' body and drank his blood.
Never. It's symbol. Never. You know why? Because in the Gospel of John, there's several. Let me tell you a little bit about the supper. First of all, they weren't at a table. And when we see the Last Supper, what we see is Jesus and the 12 apostles, 13 good-looking Italians. In a typical Italian provincial scene with Italian apparel, not Near Eastern. They'd be sitting on the floor, no chairs, no tables, nothing. The cloth was spread on the floor and trays of food. We never see it that way. We're influenced by European paintings and by Italian paintings, see. And never, Da Vinci had to do it this way so he could show facial expressions on each of the apostles. See, he was doing a character work on his painting with Jesus in the center. But they would be in a circle. What it is they celebrate. It was Passover they were celebrating. And Jesus never said, when he said, "This is my blood which is shed for you." In the Near East they say that. The men, when they gather together, and it'll be all men, no women there at all. When the men are in there, they'll say to each other, "My eyes, they're yours." I mean, can you imagine here in the West, men saying that to each other? "My eyes, they're yours." What would you say? "Get away from me, you." They use the men are affectionate to each other and speak affectionately to each other. The men will even put their heads in the lap of another man. Nothing more there's nothing sexual involved in it. You've got to understand that. But there's strong affection. Just like women can get away with more affection showing to another woman than a man can with another man. Because you're not a man. It's culture. It's culture. And when Jesus said, "This is my blood," It was for saying, I love you all. That's what he was saying. But when it said, which is my blood, which is shed for you, was added by the scribe, Jesus never said that. Never said that. But the bread being broken, all this term, the men talk to each other like that in the Near East. It's a terms of affection, meaning we're a brotherhood here. We really care for each other here, see. Culture. It's culture. But later on it was turned into something else. But I tell you where they get it from. Where Jesus said in another place in the Gospel of John, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part with me. That is an Aramaic idiom, which means be willing to suffer the consequences of adopting my teachings. It means you're going to suffer for them because the world teaches force is the only way. Jesus was teaching no, meekness is the way. The world teaches the sword is the answer. Today, it's the gun and the bomb. Right? That's not and you can suffer by teaching the opposite to this and behaving the opposite to it, because you could lose your life the same way the early followers of Jesus did lose their lives. That's why Rome was afraid of them. Rome was afraid because it was a powerful movement of meekness. I'm telling you, if Jesus' teachings were ever to become active in our world, it'd scare our government, scare Iran, scare Islam, scare all of them, because it's a whole new way of approach of living. It's absolutely the most revolutionary teaching. That's why he was crucified. Gandhi knew this too. That's why Gandhi started following that form of teaching. And Martin Luther King knew it also, Jr. He knew it also. And there's a big difference. Gandhi was freeing India. Jesus was freeing all mankind, which was different. In other words, here is the way, the new way of life to live. And this we don't hear, and this isn't practice. It's better to say, Jesus died for me. His blood has cleansed me from sin, and now I'm going to heaven. Don't let heaven come here. Let me go to heaven. It's missed completely. Yes? And we'll close with this.
In your opening recitation, I think I heard you use the term Malkuth.
Yes.
Which is Kabbalistic. Were they involved in Kabbalism in those days?
No, that came later. What they had was the Merkava. The Merkava is what they had first. And today, even your Jewish people will not allow you to get into that form of the mysticism, because some people can lose their minds in going that deeply into the mysticism. And they don't allow the Merkava teaching. I've got the book on the Merkava teachings. And from Aramaic and Hebrew. And but the rabbis speak against it. They don't mind the Kabbalah. They don't mind that at all. But the Kabbalah are the leftover teachings of the Merkava. And this is what Jesus was teaching, was the Malkutha. That's his gospel. His gospel was the Malkuth. In Aramaic it's Malkutha. In Hebrew it's Malkuth. Same word. But the difference here is Jesus brought it down in a very practical level that even common people could enter into it and grasp it. See? That's different. He took away a lot of the mystery of which mysticism means. Mysticism means a mystery. He took a lot of the mystery and showed the practical way we can live this out.
And Malkuth translates to what?
In English, we translate it as kingdom. But Jesus called it the Malkuth Dashmeya. Malkuth Dashmeya, the kingdom of heaven, which people made it that's a place you go to after you die. But it wasn't. It was here and now. And this is why we don't hear his gospel. I'm sorry, we don't hear it. No minister teaches it. I'm talking about that you hear on the radio or that you see on TV. They don't teach it. They're too busy talking about sin. What would we do without it, Oh. Born in sin and conceived in iniquity. Little did that psalmist know that when he wrote that people were going to take that literally. He was speaking using metaphoric language, and he was saying, Israel, we're in trouble because we were conceived in iniquity. It's a metaphoric speech, and now we made it a doctrine. We suffer from our theology and the way we interpret the Bible. Thank you. It's been a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Errico.